Welcome to Coleman Report Live, Friday the 13th edition. I'm Bob Coleman. We're talking Main Street and the small business lenders who help it grow. Katie, Lance, our regulars, thank you for joining us. Lance, I understand the Arkansas Police Department have an APB out on you.
Probably so, Bob. I didn't think it was Friday the 13th, which explains why this morning has been so chaotic and so troublesome. But I was running a bit late to get here and actually turned my computer on about 5 minutes ago. So it was a quick trip.
We see Lance being yanked out by a couple of people in blue. You know what it's regarding. Nothing serious, just 120 in a 50-mile-an-hour zone. Okay.
Bob, I'll have to do a SBA form. I won't have to do a 912 anymore.
You don't have to do a 912. Just hand it to him. All right, here we go. Gentleman, lady, here you go. Here's my form. There's the certificates. Hey, thank you all for joining us. It's been a wild week, wild month, wild year. We have a lot of interesting news, so let's get to it. Number one, we did a great webinar yesterday on equity requirements, and I just want to give you a couple takeaways, and this is an interesting takeaway is, have you increased, your institution increased the credit box on equity requirements for business acquisition, obviously hotels, any type of business acquisition? Those answers surprise you, Lance?
Not completely, but I do expect over time, Bob, we may see these numbers change a little bit because one of the things that we're seeing, especially in hospitality, you're seeing people still do it, but they may be ramping up the equity injection requirement on those loans. Of course, the SBA SOP gives us minimum required equity injections in certain types of loans, but that doesn't mean you can't ask for more.
And Lance makes a great point, and that is not only does it mean you can, but you also, in today's environment, you should. One of the takeaways in hotel financing, Lance, is equity in minimum of 25%. Several lenders want to go, Katie, what they said 30, 35, a couple even said 40%, correct?
Right. It's mostly going to be that first number, though. It's not too many in the other categories.
Well, one of the things, Bob, is we're in an environment, we've both lived through multiple recessions. This one's a little different, but right now, appraised values.
Lance, follow the script. Follow the script.
Oh, sorry, Bob.
That's poll question number 3. Hold on.
Oh, okay.
Hold on. Number 2, are you approving new construction in 2021? We'll get to your appraisal question next, Lance.
Wow. Absolutely stunning, Bob.
Yeah, I would have thought we'd be closer to 50-50. Now, obviously, you have a good customer. They have a track record. They have equity. You're going to do the transactions. Someone coming in for the first time, wanting to do minimums, it's not going to happen.
Bob, I think you make a great point. If you've got a strong player in a particular business type, and we were talking about hospitality, hotels yesterday, you've got a seasoned hotel operator who has a location that what they call drive-in destination. An example of that, Bob, is Branson, Missouri. But you've got a strong operator putting a project in Branson, Missouri. I don't see a reason not to consider doing a new construction.
Our expert yesterday, Lance, said we are going to get back to normal. That's the good news. But it could be anywhere from 2021 through 2024 and getting back closer and closer. I misspoke, 2022 through 2024.
Well, and he also commented, Bob, that we will get back to normal in these drive-in destinations. He mentioned Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. He did say we would get back to normal quicker in those locations.
Right. All right, here we go, Lance. I'll let you ask the question.
Do you anticipate commercial real estate values in 2021 to increase, decrease, or remain the same?
There you go.
Well, and there was some good insight provided in the hospitality webinar yesterday. Bob, he talked about all of the construction projects in hospitality that were planned for 2020. Not all of them, but a large percentage of those got put on hold.
Mm-hmm. That's
So
true. Yeah, they were halted. Obviously, this is the ticking time bomb. We're all worried about commercial real estate. Commercial real estate valuation 101 is based on rents. As we said, hospitality loans, they are not real estate loans. You simply can't add up the number of rooms and say, hey, each room is worth, or they call it the key, each key is worth 130,000. It's based on revenues. And when you have a business with declining revenues, that means the underlying property has declined in value as well. And now we anticipate getting back as real estate values rebounded during the recession. But for the short term, that causes all sorts of issues with regulators, valuations. And basically, the takeaway is if you have a 2019 appraisal, it can be nowhere close what the true value is.
Well, and the other thing, Bob, is I think appraisers are probably struggling with how to give an accurate value because
I'm not criticizing the appraisers. They're only as good as the underlying data, and underlying data is all over the place. Yeah, and how do they do that? Right.
Yeah.
Katie, what's going on with Chairman Rubio? He's been in the news. He's pushing for stimulus 2.0, additional stimulus. What's his letter today about?
So today he had a letter that he put out about the fraud in the EIDL program. And there's been some concern about that program for a while, especially with the increase in SBA employees. During this whole process, they had to bring on a lot of employees who are working virtually through this entire process. And now they're starting to see some questionable loans out there. Looks like some of them might have made loans to themselves or inappropriately influenced some of these EIDL loans. And they're even seeing law enforcement recently seized $450 million in EIDLs, which they suspect to be related to fraud schemes. So Rubio is just kind of asking for more details about that process of vetting the employees, also just mitigating the issues and how the agency is going to move forward to prevent fraud in the future.
Katie, when this first hit, Inspector General said there were 6 institutions that were the primary victims of fraud. I haven't heard that updated number. Is that number still valid? Is it more widespread? Are these one-offs, or what have you heard?
So what we're seeing, at least in the numbers, is that it looks like a lot of fintechs were being targeted. And so I imagine, at least especially with PPP, because they could make those loans, a lot of the fraud probably was unfortunately limited to some of those newer lenders who are just getting started with the program. With EIDLs, it's a little different because that was through SBA. So I don't know if they have a pattern yet as far as what's going on with that.
How much were these IDL loans? What was the dollar amount, Katie, the average loan size? Do you know offhand?
I don't know that offhand. I mean, obviously the advance is going to be somewhere below that 10 million or around 10 million. So it's a problem, but they're working on it.
What I'd like, Lance, is Senator Rubio, other senators are pushing this to the forefront, saying, yeah, we understand there's fraud, but we need to get, quote, economic assistance to small businesses during this time of enormous need.
Well, and Bob, SBA is no different. PPP, there was a mad rush of unbelievable volume of applications. So the possibility of fraud certainly is relevant to that. And the SBA had the same thing, a ton of applications. They had to run out and hire a tremendous number of either term employees or new people who were not necessarily familiar. So, I mean, the possibility give away the benefit of
No,
and
I
having some fraud, or writing a program where there would be no fraud, where you vetted everything, and then the money would not get there in time to help the small business.
and I maintain, and we're going to follow up on this, the percentage of fraud, it's out, yes, it's out there, but as a percentage, it's small, especially when you compare. We're doing some interesting things in terms of tracking New Zealand, Japan, obviously the UK, Canada, France. There's fraud there, and the initial reports are the fraud from the United States is less on a percentage basis than the fraud in those countries. But we'll cover all of their Main Street bounce back programs and programs. But Lance, I had a conversation with one of the restaurant owners I patronize in Orange County, Southern California. The restaurants are now indoor dining. LA County's still been closed since March for indoor. But this particular restaurateur, he was able to expand into the parking lot, got the necessary permits, and has all that. And now there's rumblings that Orange County may close indoor dining as well. And he just hired up again, ramped up, hired people. We talk about vendor supply, so reestablishing credit with the vendors and having the back rooms. And now it looks like they may go through this all over again.
Well, that's part of the reason we need the legislation that was proposed before the election to get some traction and start moving. PPP Part 2 intended to help those businesses that still need assistance, and the restaurant and hospitality industry certainly are industries that probably need a second shot of PPP funding. So we need that.
Katie, the drum is still beating on that. It is. Would you still classify it as bipartisan support, and would you still classify it as do people sense the urgency, even though the machinery is difficult in getting the gears working inside the Beltway?
I definitely think there's still bipartisan support for especially small businesses. I mean, everybody's saying they're really the backbone of our economy right now. They need help. So I don't really see any contention there. Really, you're seeing the problems in other areas of these laws where they want to tack on other issues and things like that, or perhaps skinny it down. And that's the problem that they're really facing right now, is trying to come up with the wording they need. And of course, they don't want problems like we had when we first released PPP, where people were very confused. I think they want a very much more clear program this time around.
Well, yes, absolutely, absolutely. I'm going to let Katie talk about our Fraud Friday story. My two takeaways on this are, number one, you need to have a strong board if you find yourself on a board of whatever type of organization, whether it's a nonprofit, whether it's a CDC. You are not a rubber stamp potted plant, for those of you who know that reference. But you have a fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders, to your regulators, to your consumers, to your product. And here we have a situation, and we may think these are small numbers, Katie, but what happened here?
So this is a community bank, so the numbers are going to appear a little bit smaller, but unfortunately, this is going clear to the top. The CEO of this bank really discovered that there was a house that was in foreclosure that she quite liked. It needed a little bit of work, but she thought it was a good deal, and she saw the appraisal. Unfortunately, at least for her, she could not acquire that house because she was on the board, and that would be a conflict of interest. So instead of just dropping it there, she reaches out to an employee of a real estate development company and asks that person to act as a straw purchaser in exchange for a $650,000 line of credit at the bank. So then he acquires the house and gives it to her for this line of credit.
Yeah, I think 50 cents on the dollar for 140,000.
Right. She also says that she negotiated a fair price, which if you look at their appraisal, she really made it sound like this house was really falling apart, and it was not falling apart. There was not that many problems with it. It did need some work, but not that much.
Yeah, so she
Fortunately, because of this, the bank eventually saw some other bad loans and eventually had to close because they just couldn't stay open.
yeah, and she was the president. She got 2 years in jail for that. I attributed this to the smartest person in the room syndrome. I noticed that a lot in covering these fraud stories. They think they're smarter than everyone else. They think they're smarter than the directors and then the board, and they go, well, this isn't quite the letter of the law, but I can get around it. And Lance, it's intent most of the time, correct?
Absolutely, Bob. In this circumstance, I can't imagine a bank executive giving up their career
Yeah, give up their career.
For a house.
Yeah.
I just, it's hard. So,
Yeah, yeah.
It's like SBA's SOP. You know, they give us guidelines, and, you know, there have been circumstances over the years where lenders have tried to circumvent the guidelines in the SOP, and guess what? The Inspector General frequently catches that circumvention.
Yeah. Yeah, it's and these are sad stories all around. Yeah, let's go to our questions. Russell says, we have an idle advance that was deducted from our PPP forgiveness loan. If not paid by the borrower, would it be eligible for payment under SBA?
Well, my understanding is absolutely, Russell, the reduction in the PPP forgiveness doesn't take away from the fact that it's still a PPP loan and should be 100% guaranteed.
John Riosti, American Banker, our Thursdays with John guest, said that what's interesting about that, Lance, is that the government's therefore paid it twice. They paid it once on the initial advance, and then they're going to pay the bank. He just pointed that out. He said that's interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I don't absolutely am not sure what the purpose was in. It's a confusing process. Again, it was presented up front that the idle advance was forgivable, the PPP loan was forgivable. You know, there was some language in the CARES Act that told us that it's supposed to be reduced, but they're both supposed to be forgivable. So if they reduce the PPP forgiveness, you still got a balance on a PPP loan, which is 100% guaranteed by the SBA.
Yeah. So that's right. That's the question. We have this is for the 3508 over $2 million forgiveness. We know that the borrower must submit documentation, but how much is the lender required to submit to SBA? This is over I'm sorry, 3508. I guess that's all documentation. So give us a quick recap of where we are on that, Lance.
On the 3508S, you're typically going to just submit the form to SBA, and you're going to keep the documentation at the bank. If SBA reviews it or requests a review, then you have to be able to submit the appropriate supporting documentation to SBA.
And you need to keep, we talked about this, you need to keep it for 6 years. Remember that over $2 million at 3509 to 3510, we have those documents. We've put them in our chat board. It appears now these are draft documents, but we know they're draft because they expired Halloween, October 31st. There's supposedly a review process on that, so that is still in play. Joseph, make a note. Let's ask the question if anybody's been paid over $2 million on forgiveness. I don't believe they have because we still don't have the appropriate approved form to process that. I see Katie nodding her head also. Yeah.
Yeah, I expect them to come out any day, but they so far have not been published anywhere yet.
Yeah. And as I said, we're going to be rocking and rolling over the next couple months in terms of news, in terms of release forms. This isn't a fallow period. There's going to be a lot of stuff that's going to be hitting, and I think it's going to be faster sooner than later. Okay, Don asked the question. We have an EPC owner structure with 2 operating companies. What do we do, Lance? Do we get 1919s on everything, just on the 20% owners? Do we get 1919 on the other companies?
Well, you're going to get a 1919 on the EPC and both the OCs, and you're going to get a 1919 on Joe, Gary, and Mary.
What if
In
Joe
this
had 5% and Mary had 95%? Do we
Well,
get
you're
a
still going
5% from Joe?
I'm still going to get the 1919 on Joe because you have to reflect 100% ownership in E-Tran or SBA1.
And we talked about this yesterday, Lance, is that SBA requires guarantees, personal guarantees of over 20%. But if you have a 10 or 15% owner, what is Lance going to do?
I'm going to take the guarantee, Bob. SBA requires it on 20% or more ownership, but if someone has less than 20% and they're obviously the financial strength, or let's just say they're the operational strength, Bob, of the business, you want to take that personal guarantee as well.
Robert asked the question, Lance. I will let you squirm. How do you get SBA to pay the guarantee on a balance of a PPP loan? Do we submit a PDK just like a regular 7A? What do we do, Lance?
Well, the problem, and that's a great question because I've looked at the PDK and I tried to determine how would we make a PPP loan fit the current purchase demand kit package? Well, it don't. So obviously there's going to be some guidance on how PPP guaranteed purchases occur. And I don't know, Bob. You've got no personal guarantees, no collateral. It's going to be a pretty slim purchase demand kit. So I suspect SBA is going to come out for a way for us to submit for guaranteed purchase on these PPP loans.
I know we're running a little late, but one last question from Sandy. These are great questions. For sole proprietorships, do PPP borrowers need to provide proof of paychecks to themselves during the covered period, or just their 2019 Schedule C, or soon to be their 2020 Schedule C? What do we do on that, Lance?
Well, it goes back to how the PPP loan amount was determined. And in the case of a sole proprietor, they're going to use the Schedule C, which would indicate to me I would want to have both a interim income statement and payroll expended payroll report. Both.
Yeah, but she's saying this, but if the entrepreneur isn't on payroll, then we need
an interim financial statement or interim. They need to provide an interim financial statement on the business for that.
Hey, thank you all for joining us. Interesting times. Well, I promise interesting times will continue next week. I can't tell you how that will develop, but I can make that promise. Katie and Lance, have a nice weekend. And thank you for joining us today for the Coleman Report Live and for supporting America's Main Street, one entrepreneur at a time.
Have a great weekend.